Even if money does not solve everything, it at least helps with many problems. But it certainly does not turn bad people into good ones. The central figure of today's story was a rich man, but also a very bad one, and unfortunately, his wealth only worked to his advantage. The small town of Brentwood is about a 20-minute drive from Nashville. This place is known for its natural beauty and is ranked among the 20 wealthiest and most prestigious places in the United States. With a population of about 40,000, the town is considered one of the safest. Since its founding in 1969, only 8 murders have occurred there. In fact, Brentwood is regarded as one of the safest places in the country. It has luxurious parks, numerous restaurants, and clubs for wealthy guests. In addition, the headquarters of many large manufacturing companies, including international organizations, are located there. Despite this reputation, even in such seemingly paradise-like places, real nightmares can happen. The home of Rachael and Randolph Maidens was located inside the guarded Governor's Club, a country club community on a hill. The estate covered a total of 600 acres and included an award-winning private golf course. The Governor's Club was one of the wealthiest and most prestigious neighborhoods in the city. The couple's villa was enormous and cost a fortune. It seemed like a real fortress where someone could start a family and run a business. Rachael Elizabeth Frisbee Maidens was a 34-year-old orthodontist who had her own private practice in the city's business district. She was a very beautiful woman, naturally blonde, and a devoted mother to her daughter, Natalie. Rachael attended a Catholic private school in Nashville, then went to Birmingham Southern College, followed by dental school at the University of Florida. Throughout her education, Rachael received numerous awards. The successful beauty also achieved success in tennis. Her accomplishments included a prestigious scholarship, and the crowning achievement of her academic success was completing her orthodontic residency at Children's Hospital in Washington, D.C. Despite her young age, Rachael had a brilliant career. Thanks to her success, she managed to open her own practice. She began publishing articles in professional journals and regularly gave lectures at conferences. However, not everything in her life was so successful. While she was still studying on December 3, 2003, her father, Richard, was arrested for selling oxycodone. He had been a respected pharmacist, but he became involved in the illegal trade of prescription drugs. Although law enforcement had only just begun investigating his case, he was so afraid of losing his reputation that he took his own life only 2 days after his arrest. The family's nightmare did not stop there. The police continued investigating all family members. The bank accounts of Rachael, her mother, and her brother were seized. The investigations dragged on for several years. Rachael's mother was fined $115,000, marking the end of that dark phase in their lives. Many close friends and family members claimed that all of this caused great harm to Rachel's emotional state. However, it did not stop her from pursuing professional success. She endured all of these difficulties with strength and continued to build her own career. She still wanted to be the best in her profession. Striving for wealth and independence, she managed to overcome the family's financial crisis and the terrible loss of a loved one. After that, she rebuilt herself and took her life back into her own hands. Her husband, Randy, as he was known in his close circle, grew up in Georgia. After high school, he attended the Georgia Institute of Technology. Gradually, he became a well-paid pharmaceutical sales manager. But by the time of the tragic events, all of that had collapsed, and Randy was unemployed. Only 3 months before the events described in this story, a noticeable change in his behavior had occurred, causing many problems. Rachael reported that he quickly descended into uncontrolled alcoholism. There was also suspicion that he was simultaneously consuming various medications, which worsened the harmful effects. During this period, several witnesses saw him enter a restaurant, heavily intoxicated, harassing customers and staff. One of the employees felt forced to call the emergency number 911. The young woman who made the emergency call identified the man as Randy Maidens because he had eaten there several times with his wife. A few minutes after the first call, she called emergency services again because she became even more worried. She said that several suspicious items had accidentally fallen out of the man's bag, including a shotgun and a suspiciously large bottle that looked like the painkiller Tylenol. The rude guest gathered everything and then tried to leave the establishment. The waitress managed to persuade him to stay. The patrol officers who arrived at the scene immediately noticed that the man was behaving inappropriately, but they could not say for certain whether he was drunk or under the influence of something stronger. Randy became anxious. He wanted to leave, claiming that his wife had called him and asked him to come home. The waitress offered to contact his wife, but he refused to provide her phone number. The man tried to get into his vehicle, but the police officers did not allow it. During the search of his car, another shotgun was found on the back seat. Despite these strange circumstances, the man was not arrested. Several witnesses saw him being picked up by someone in a car that evening, someone who would never have allowed him to drive while intoxicated. When Randy found himself in such situations, he always asked that no one call his wife. He complained that he was often the victim of her anger and that he was afraid of upsetting her. Considering his inappropriate behavior, this reaction seemed quite natural. On the evening of April 21, 2013, Rachael's mother, Elizabeth Betty Frisbee, called the Brentwood Police Department and asked officers to check on her daughter's property. She immediately said that Randy was on the verge of taking his own life. She was worried because she could not speak with Rachael. Betty had tried calling her daughter for a long time, but the phone was answered by Rachael's husband, who refused to hand the phone to his wife. Finally, Betty lost her composure and threatened to call the police. That did not work, so she had to keep her promise. The officers arrived at the house within minutes and immediately noticed that the curtains were drawn throughout the home. Since no one responded to their knocking, there was no way to see what was happening inside. Fortunately, the garage door was open. The police officers entered the house and called out the residents by name. Neither Randy nor Rachael answered. Suddenly, a child responded to their calls. A 2-year-old girl named Natalie was on the first floor, crying. The child refused to say what had happened and kept repeating the same sentence through tears. "Daddy is gone. Daddy is gone." During the inspection of the house, one of the officers stepped into the large hallway. Leaning over the balcony railing, he saw a blood-spattered wall and a shotgun lying on a couch on the ground floor. Rachael was found in the corridor between the living room and the hallway leading to the master bedroom. She showed no signs of life. She had been shot as if in a shooting gallery. 8 shots from a 9mm pistol and 2 shotgun blasts to the back. The victim was wrapped in a blanket. The investigation made it clear that someone had tried to wipe blood from the walls. Invisible stains were left on the floor. Naturally, the murdered woman's husband, Randy Maidens, was immediately placed on the wanted list. Helicopters and SWAT teams were deployed to prevent the suspect from escaping. The upscale residential area looked like a Hollywood blockbuster. Police officers actively worked with the victim's neighbors, trying to find out where the man might have gone. When the victim's mother heard the shocking news, she immediately came to pick up her grandchild. Her son-in-law was considered especially dangerous because of his recent inappropriate behavior. It was expected that he would remain armed, which is why a warning was issued. Neighbors of the family confirmed that they had seen the fugitive on many occasions in an inappropriate state. A note was found on the kitchen table inside the dead woman's villa. In it, Randy apologized repeatedly to his daughter and confessed that he loved her very much. He wrote that he was forced to flee because of his terrible deed, but he did not say exactly what he had done. He thanked all of his wife's relatives for the years they had given him. Randy confessed that he could no longer endure the humiliation he claimed to experience daily from his wife. He wrote that since the beginning of their relationship, she had emotionally destroyed him every night and treated him like dirt. After 7 years, he had simply lost patience. On that fateful evening, he claimed, his wife had started to harass him in the same way, and that was the last straw. The father said he wanted to take care of his daughter, Natalie, and apologized several times to the child because he could not take it anymore and had given up. He also emphasized that he did not want the girl to stay with her mother and asked that custody be transferred to Rachael's relatives on her side of the family. When experts examined the contents of the letter, the main suspect was still on the run. According to some experts, his letter could be interpreted not only as a confession, but also as a farewell note. This made the search efforts even more complicated and suggested that the man might already be dead. Strangely, a car belonging to Randy was parked in the driveway of the property. Inside, officers found $7,000 in cash in a large bag in the trunk. Another large amount of cash was found in the house. By checking phone records, officers determined that Randy had called his lawyer on the evening of the murder. Apparently, the man's original plan may have been to kill his wife and then leave with the money to start a new life. But then something went wrong, and he wrote the letter. Perhaps it was only staged to cover his tracks. But then, why did he not take his car? What could have stopped him, especially since he still had enough time? Law enforcement suspected that it may have had something to do with Betty's calls. She called the police, and that could have ruined the criminal's plans. To the surprise of the police, the search did not last long. 12 hours after the search for the killer began, Randy simply came out of the woods behind his house with his hands raised. He surrendered to the authorities without offering resistance. He immediately accused his wife of psychologically harassing him for years. He claimed that the pressure had become especially intense after he lost his job. Because of this alleged behavior by his beloved wife, he said he had practically slipped into life on the edge of society. In his defense, Randy said that he was Rachel's third husband because the others had not been able to endure her constant nagging either. However, this in no way justified 10 cowardly shots into his wife's back. The criminal had barely had time to process the consequences of his restaurant incident 3 months earlier, and now he was also facing a charge for murdering his wife. It became known that he had recently come into conflict with the law several times for minor offenses. Specifically, he had been stopped in his car a few months before his wife's death while intoxicated. Because of the strong smell of alcohol, the police officer was convinced that Randy was drunk, but he refused to take a test. Under the law, this was equivalent to drunk driving. Later, he was involved in a car accident for the same reason. He was so drunk that he crashed into a power station and left almost 200 homes without electricity for several hours. A few weeks before Rachel's murder, a neighbor saw a stranger wearing a ski mask and accompanied by 2 dogs running through the woods. It was the same place from which Randy later emerged when he surrendered to the authorities. The neighbor spoke to the stranger and recognized Randy. She approached him to find out what was happening and immediately realized that he was heavily intoxicated or under the influence of some substance. Randy told the neighbor that he had been walking his dogs and had gotten lost, so he had walked toward her property. According to the woman, at that time, he had something like a bow and arrows in his backpack, so she hurried away. Later, he was seen many more times engaging in similar activities, which deeply unsettled the residents who lived near the Maidens' residence. They feared for their safety. At the end of March, trespassing proceedings were initiated against Randy in Florida, but he got away unscathed. The investigations were simply covered up. He was probably saved by money. The most disturbing incident occurred in January 2013 during a work conference in Orlando, which he attended with his wife. One evening, he visited a bar and became so drunk that he could no longer speak coherently. The establishment's staff asked him to leave, but he began smashing dishes and cursing. Several people heard him simultaneously threaten to kill his wife, but no one took these drunken threats seriously. Several guests tried to intervene and escort the raging man out of the bar, but Randy started fighting, so the police had to be called again. He was eventually arrested for disorderly conduct and consuming alcohol in public, but he was released the next day. His employer learned about the incident. The pharmaceutical company was concerned about its reputation, and Randy's inappropriate behavior was taken very seriously. One of his colleagues, who wished to remain anonymous, advised him to take temporary leave for health reasons. However, Randy did not listen and returned to work 3 days later. As a result, he was fired. During the investigation, the police conducted numerous interviews with the killer's colleagues, all under strict confidentiality. The organization's management threatened to fire anyone who openly discussed the incidents involving their alcoholic employee. According to these individuals, the perpetrator's behavior had changed drastically in the months before the incident with his wife. At the same time, Randy himself did not explain what might have caused this change. He always complained about his wife and blamed her for everything. However, everyone around him found it hard to believe that his wife could have pushed him that far. Rachel always seemed kind, calm, and reasonable. It was difficult to believe. But Even if the woman scolded him at home, that was no excuse for behaving uncontrollably in public places and posing a danger to strangers. It turned out that Randy's ex-girlfriend, Lissa Farley, had been trying to contact him around the time of the abuse. They had been together in high school, but their romance did not work out, and fate separated their paths. Lissa married, divorced, and later remembered Randy, determined to meet him again and give their relationship another chance in adulthood. She learned about Randy's marital problems and assumed that the whole situation would end in divorce. In fact, she was shocked by the recent events in Randy's life and thought she could help him get his life back on track. Lissa had known him for more than a decade. They had been friends for a long time. She claimed that there was not a single episode in Randy's biography that could be considered a warning sign for violent revenge. She knew him as a mature and intelligent man who valued his family and loved his child. At the same time, she also knew the other side of him. According to her, he had lived for a very long time with an alcoholic father who treated him badly. As he got older, he had a very strained relationship with his mother. That was one of the reasons he did not want his daughter, Natalie, placed in the care of his own family members. Lissa suspected that his problems and difficult childhood may have broken him, and that the man needed help. Employees of the company, from which the killer had been dismissed, claimed that they knew about his problems with illegal substances. According to colleagues and even management, he had admitted long before the incident that he struggled with addiction. Nevertheless, it was believed that he had overcome these problems and their consequences in the years before the attack. But then he relapsed. What was the real reason for this man's misconduct, which ultimately led to the murder of his wife? Immediately after his arrest, 42-year-old Randy was charged with first-degree murder. He was also accused of endangering the life of a child, which became the second charge. In addition, the man was accused of tampering with evidence because he had tried to dispose of bloodstains and the blanket in which the victim had been wrapped. Investigators were certain that he intended to eliminate evidence of the crime and then flee, presumably to Mexico, with the money he had prepared. Bail was initially set at $2.5 million. He sat behind bars and awaited trial. By the end of June 2013, the man still had not pleaded guilty to all charges. His lawyer was one of Nashville's best defense attorneys, David Rabin. Rabin sought a reduction in bail and the man's release under house arrest, arguing that Randy was actually a victim of his wife's alleged tyranny. The defense attorney insisted that despite the discovery of a large amount of cash in Randy's car, no documents, cards, or other evidence were found to indicate that the perpetrator intended to leave the city. The defense argued that his client had enough time to flee, but did not. The prosecution held a different opinion for a long time. There was even a witness who claimed to have heard about plans to flee to Mexico, but that statement later turned out to be false. The mother of the deceased filed a civil lawsuit against her son-in-law because she wanted to prevent him from accessing financial accounts and assets that he and his wife had acquired together. She feared that Randy would once again evade justice by bribing everyone he could reach with the family's assets. She was certain that this was the only way the criminal had previously escaped punishment for his offenses. Rachael's mother hoped that he simply would not be able to bear the court costs and that he would receive what he deserved for the heinous act he had committed. Despite everything, time worked in the prisoner's favor. His lawyer managed to significantly reduce his bail to $750,000. Randy immediately posted this amount. Since his mother-in-law's lawsuit was still pending, this meant that he would have to wait at least another year and a half for his hearing. The trial was scheduled for September 2014. Surprisingly, the judge even allowed Randy to continue living in the house where his wife's murder had been committed. However, the man had numerous difficulties to deal with because the bail conditions still applied. He was not allowed to leave the house without notifying the Brentwood police at least 24 hours in advance. During this period, he always had to have a lawyer with him and had to wear a GPS monitoring device in the form of an ankle bracelet. Contact with his daughter and with the family members of his murdered wife was prohibited. Meanwhile, his mother-in-law continued to fight and awaited a judgment in the civil case. She eventually succeeded in obtaining a court restraining order on the couple's property. Nevertheless, Randy simply entered the house and took his belongings and clothes. When this came to light, he faced a new charge of contempt of court. Thanks to the efforts of his lawyer, however, this charge was dismissed. Such brazenness seemed unthinkable, but it later appeared that the criminal got away with many things, thanks to his money and his connections to the Governor's Club and local law enforcement circles. Investigations revealed that Randy had not simply fled into the woods after the murder. Several neighbors said that on the morning after the massacre, they discovered that someone had tried to break into their homes through garage doors and regular doors. Police officers checked the club's video recordings and found that it was Randy who had tried to break into a neighbor's house. His exact intentions remain unclear, but he posed a significant danger. He denied these facts himself, and gradually, everything was covered up. The judge's decisions, which allowed a dangerous criminal who had lost control of himself to remain free for a year and a half, were long criticized and rightly questioned. Randy became a true example of how fatal impunity can be. He remained free during that entire period thanks to a good lawyer who gave him the chance to await trial outside jail. Only months later, in December 2013, he was caught trying to enter a residential complex in another suburb of Nashville. It was a rather bizarre incident reported by one of the residents of the apartment building. According to him, Randy tried to gain access by banging on the door and pretending to be a police officer. The resident sensed that something was wrong. When he did not open the door to the uninvited guest, he heard him doing the same at other apartments, so he called the police. When the police arrived, they found Randy once again heavily intoxicated. The very next day, the judge decided to revoke his bail. Amazingly, the manic alcohol incidents continued both before and after the murder of his wife. It is hard to imagine the fear his neighbors lived with over the previous year, especially after learning that Randy had been released on bail and was living in the family villa next to them. It seemed that the killer would soon receive what he deserved, because under Tennessee law, his offense could have carried the death penalty. But his experienced defense attorney had an excellent plan. Unexpectedly for the victim's family, Randy pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and child neglect on September 15, 2014. As a result, he received only 25 years in prison. Strangely, this was not even half of the maximum sentence for this catalog of offenses. The perpetrator could have received 60 years in prison. Furthermore, the killer's lawyer managed to secure the possibility of parole, which may become possible under the condition of good behavior. Since Randy was 42 years old at the time of sentencing, he may have the opportunity to be released around the age of 60. During sentencing, Randy said the following words: "Rachel, I promised to love and cherish you, and I betrayed all of that. I will live with this anguish forever. No prison is worse than the one I have imposed on myself. To all of Rachel's relatives and friends, I am truly sorry that I caused you so much pain and so many terrible moments." The murdered woman's mother, Betty, regarded the court ruling as a personal insult. She turned several times to higher authorities in an attempt to obtain a review and a harsher sentence, but everything was in vain. Randy himself described his lenient sentence as an opportunity to save at least one of Natalie's parents. Naturally, Rachel's family was shocked by these decisions during the investigation and trial. Her mother and brother turned to the public through the media to express their dissatisfaction. They also emphasized their grief over the brutal and tragic death of a beautiful and successful woman, and protested against the absurd decisions of a justice system that seemed to be on the perpetrator's side. Randy was never punished for many of the other allegations and prior offenses in the way Rachel's family believed he should have been. Randy's lawyer responded to the accusations by conveying his client's sincere regret and condolences to the victim's family. However, Betty heard only empty phrases that neither absolved the perpetrator nor comforted her, and certainly could not bring Rachel back. Natalie was placed in Betty's custody. The child would inherit her parents' entire estate when she came of age. The victim's mother remained convinced that the only reason for her son-in-law's lenient sentence was his connections and his money. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourselves.